With the success of the Virgin New Adventures to continue the Doctor's storyline following Survival, Virgin Publishing were motivated by the idea of original Doctor Who novels featuring the previous incarnations of the Doctor. Blood Harvest by Terrance Dicks acted as the book to introduce the gateway to the Virgin Missing Adventures, which acted as the prequel novel that would begin the Virgin Missing Adventures Goth opera. Goth opera is a very popular novel in the series that features vampires and dark Gothic depictions of the Time Lords, as well as cults that worship the vampires. But you do not need to have any prior context to Blood Harvest to enjoy Goth opera. But if you're into the depiction of vampires in Doctor Who and Gothic horror tones, Blood Harvest will be up your alley, equal to Goth opera. And now we have reached 30 years of the Virgin Missing Adventures and the birthday of Goth opera. And why am I doing this review? It's because the adaptation by Big Finish is round the corner, coming out in July. There is a lot of releases coming out in July. It's a big month for Big Finish, I can't lie. But this one is still, I would say, the release I'm looking forward to the most out of everything being revealed so far, along with the next Second Doctor release, which is again the same month, along with Death World as well, the original 3 Doctors. So flipping out, July is going to be good. Now, Vortex alluded to Goth opera by saying that they're only doing a one-off novel adaptations to celebrate 30 years of the Virgin Missing Adventures. That is from the Vortex magazine when they were talking about Goth opera in a piece. Do not take that with a grain of salt at all. Just because Big Finish say that they are only going to do a one-off, it doesn't mean that at all. Look at the history of Big Finish, of what they've done. Just because Big Finish say so, it doesn't mean that is definite. It just depends on the creative direction that Big Finish are feeling. And the reason why the novel adaptations concluded in 2016 was because of not selling well. Now, they are bringing the novel adaptations back for one-off release, and I will translate that to you. It's a test. They are seeing how well Goth opera does. If it does well, we will 100% get more novel adaptations. I swear it to you. If it does well. It's a big if. If it doesn't, we probably won't. So that is my guess of how it's going to go down with Big Finish. But to the novel, now if you're into your Gothic horror implemented into Doctor Who, vampires, then this is going to be your cup of tea. Then again, you got to think what it is. This is a Virgin book. This book does things that the TV show will never even comprehend in their minds to do, because some scenes are like, wow, okay. It's a Virgin book. If this is your first experience with the Virgin books, then yeah, it's going to be very different to the new series books and the new series itself and the classic series as well. It's just a whole different beast when you're dealing with the Wilderness Years books or the Virgin books, especially the Virgin books, and even the BBC books to some degree as well. Though, I would say depending on the writer, because some writers do have their boundaries of not having no filter, but there is a tendency for a few Virgin books to have no filter. I could actually say that with the BBC books as well, to be honest. Even though there's not a lot of stories where Doctor Who incorporates Hammer horror, as I like to say, into Doctor Who stories, like with the classic series, there's only really the Daemons, and I was actually only would say the Daemons to be truly Hammer horror. Image of the Fandau has got it in there, and the Brain of Morbius, but I would take that more into the sci-fi direction. The Daemons feels truly like a Hammer horror, so it's quite rare for Hammer horror to be in Doctor Who. But if you like your Hammer horror, dark Gothic depictions of the Time Lords as well as the vampires, then yeah, you're gonna like it, clearly. In this review, I will completely avoid talking about spoilers, because I know that people watching this video of watching it for one of two reasons. To know my opinion on the book, and to find out if the novel adaptation is going to be worth it. Because if I've seen the praises of the book, then no doubt, if you follow the source material, the audio will follow the same path. Though that's not 100% truthful that will turn out that way, but I have faith that it will. So I'm only going to cover very minor spoilers, but anything heavy, and even me going through the script for this review, I've took things out because I feel like it would just spoil the experience of the audio, if the audio would even do it. But yeah, I'm going to be a little bit minimal when it comes to this review, with the future novel adaptation coming out. I will be reviewing the Virgin Missing Adventures alongside the Virgin New Adventures, but the Missing Adventures will be a lot less often than the New Adventures. So, with that being said, let's review Goth Opera. The first Virgin Missing Adventure by Paul Cornell. Didn't I say Goth Opera is Doctor Who doing Gothic horror? Well, I'm saying it again until it's engraved into your mind. The basic premise should alone tell you that. Goth Opera is set in Manchester 1993. The vampires of Great Britain, following the events of E-Space Encounter and Blood Harvest, have been waiting for the message of their great messiah, and his return is imminent. While the Doctor, Tegan and Nissa are on holiday in Tasmania, Nissa is attacked by what appears to be a demonic child, but is unharmed besides 2 dots on her neck, which is no secret that Nissa becomes a vampire in this novel, and the original cover was considered too graphic by W.H. Smith. Yeah, it was toned down quite a lot. The descendants of the great vampires are after the Doctor and require the Time Lord's blood for some reason. What seems to be more concerning is these great vampires have some form of connection to the forbidden Gallifreyan cults that worship vampirism. Oh yes, we love it. Gothic horror in Doctor Who, it is so damn good when it is delivered well, and Paul Cornell, flipping hell does he deliver in that department. Yep, he did a fantastic novel with Time and Revelation, which was definitely a little bit unique, weird, but wonderful. This one, Goth Opera, is a lot more straightforward. I would say more people will be inclined to enjoy this novel more than Revelation personally, if you've never touched the Doctor Who books ever. But the premise alone, it signed me up. Big thumbs up from me with the premise. This is not the only time the extended media and the Wilderness Years have done Time Lord cults. We have the mysterious voodoo time traveller cults in the BBC books, and they make their appearance in the Virgin New Adventures, the faction Paradox, along with the Grandfather Paradox. The idea of Time Lord cults, who are now treated as outcasts from the Time Lord Society, is such an awesome premise that only really the Virgin New Adventures and the BBC books, the Wilderness Years, focuses on. Boy, does Paul Cornell love his continuity. He loved it in Revelation, and Goth Opera is no different. So that's his writing style. He does like his continuity fan wanking, although in Revelation he liked to be 2 steps away from the reader trying to interpret the book. Like I said, Goth Opera is a little bit more, well, actually it's a lot more straightforward. But Paul Cornell references Goth Opera as most unpleasant when he was writing the book. Considering the cover was toned down, and now that I've actually read the book, yeah, I think I know what he meant when he said this book was most unpleasant. Paul Cornell also referred to Goth Opera as the obvious pastiche, which, yes, it is definitely a lot of homage and love to Terrance Dicks's work of State of Decay in the E-Space trilogy, and following from Blood Harvest. as a worthy sequel. So it's probably no surprise I like goth opera, because it's very much in the formula of Terrance Dicks, but with Paul Cornell's writing style. The prologue sets up the story and the supporting characters incredibly. Even though the story seems straightforward, it clearly goes into some very dark directions and builds a lot of interesting lore about Gallifrey and their connections to the great vampires. Speaking on the vampires like Jake, funny enough, written quite similar to how they were depicted in Vampire Science, very much being young, foolish teenagers converted into vampires who straight up come from Manchester, and they still have the same character as they were being human. But the interesting characters referred to here in the beginning are Ruoff and Yavin the Messiah. What I absolutely love is the world building and the lore surrounding these splinter factions or cults within the Time Lord Society who went and moved away from the traditional code of Gallifreyan Time Lord Society and didn't honour the rule of not interfering with the lives of external beings. Though the Time Lord Society did do that behind the scenes with the Celestial Intervention Agency. It goes to show the Time Lords who rebelled against the laws of Gallifrey, the Doctor was one of them too, who wanted to see the universe as well escape his demons. So it shows that people who splintered away from the Time Lords, not all of them were pure evil, adds a lot of interesting dimensions to the Time Lords. That the splinter factions and the people who rebelled against the Time Lords, not all of them were evil, but not all of them were good either. Goth opera explores the splinter factions and the Time Lord cults who had nefarious intentions. The faction Paradox was one of these cults who acted as a voodoo time traveler cult, and another one of these cults of a Time Lord splinter faction were the Time Lords who had connections and allyship with the great vampires, who these Time Lords wanted to see them as free, and in return would use the vampires to enact their own twisted version of order and justice. The history between vampires and the Time Lords are deep rooted, and there are a lot of very powerful connections between the two of them. And yes, when you look at the Time Lords, they are depicted in many ways, like sometimes their architecture and their way of life can be very Gothic. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the Time Lords and vampires, and I honestly quite like that. Though this book definitely goes through some stuff and lays some questions around that you may or may not like. It's up to debate, really. Ruoff is one of these individuals, a female time lady who is very stern and very calm and relaxed. Even when the vampires try to test her, it doesn't work and shows the seal of Rassilon, which the symbol in many ways has connotations to the vampires. But that is really going into the rabbit hole of the lore between the relationship between the Time Lords, the vampires, and Rassilon and these cults, and the meetings that took place between the two of them. I really like Ruoff, feels like a cult leader, and we see her display these images of the great Messiah Yavin, almost like flashback sequences of a situation Yavin faced and is in critical condition. So much other vampires give them their own blood, so Yavin can stay alive through Ruoff to complete the regeneration process. Yavin appeared in the prequel before this book, Blood Harvest, so this book, without spoiling Blood Harvest a little, Yavin went through something that he almost faced death. But editor Peter Darville Evans says that you do not need to read Blood Harvest to understand or enjoy goth opera. It is not necessary. So you do need to know that little bit of context that following Blood Harvest, Yavin was very, very close to death, the great messiah of the vampires. With Yavin weakened to regenerate him for Ruoff to complete her plans, which she has pretty nefarious plans I will not say, Ruoff captures the location of another TARDIS in Tasmania. She knows the blood of this particular Time Lord, the Doctor, will regenerate the great messiah, which will put Ruoff in a good position of trust and loyalty with the vampires. Pacing is a lot different compared to Revelation. Revelation, I would say, it moves at a nice pace. It sometimes had pacing problems, The overall is okay. This one, however, even though it's not really of an action-packed story, it is very well paced. It flies by. Not by scenes of action and stuff like that. It's the horror of the situation and some pretty shocking scenes that makes this book a page turner. That is what drives the book. And straight out the gate it achieves it. Things get rather ugly for Nissa pretty quickly. Out of context it sounds wild, but we witness Nissa punch the shit out of a baby. Now, for the real context, when in her room, she is attacked by a demonic child who has unbelievable strength. Though you would say Nissa can be sometimes a bit gullible, and that is because of her upbringing within Traken. That even the most powerful people within Traken had a big code of honor, and trust was a big part of their society. So Nissa sometimes struggles to realize that people can be treacherous, deceitful and manipulative. Though it is a bit odd to see a baby talk like an adult. Bit strange, bit of a weird direction. I personally wouldn't have gave the baby or the child any dialogue. It talks almost like an adult. But then again, it's a vampire with red piercing eyes and blood all around the mouth. But Nissa goes, yeah, I'll open the window. Nissa's instincts of care ultimately be her downfall and is attacked by the crazy vampire child. And through the altercation is bitten by the neck. She does punch the absolute shit out of it, which is kind of funny, even though it wasn't intended to be funny. It is both horrific and hilarious at the same time. But the vampire's strength is almost incredible, and the attack paralysed Nissa when bitten and couldn't even scream when Tegan was at the door trying to get in and get the doctor too. What's troubling is Nissa hides her attack and plays it off as her having a nightmare, so it seems the vampiric effect has very easily took over Nissa's mind psychologically. And Nissa very early in the novel plays the role of a vampire, which will provide a very interesting dimension to how the Doctor and Tegan will react to it and deal with the situation, leaving just the Doctor and Tegan to battle this gruesome foe of the vampires. Elsewhere, Ruoff gives her complete and utter devotion to Yarvin. Pretty much scenes out of Hammer Horror here. And she revives Yarvin by using her own blood to revive the Great Messiah, and does so successfully. And the scenes of her draining her own blood and veins protruding and losing mass and her skin changing colour is pretty gruesome when you picture it. Then Yarvin is revived, and it seems Ruoff is completely devoted to the vampire cause, not treacherous or using them for manipulative ends, but a true faithful to the vampires, which is quite rare these days. Not all villains have to be deceitful. Yarvin acknowledges and gifts her the request she wanted. Betrayal and using characters for your own agenda is quite the stereotype, and we see it all the damn time, so it's nice to see this change of pace of a character not out for themselves. Nice change of pace. Tegan and the Doctor become increasingly concerned for the well-being of Nissa, who seems to be not herself, changing slowly into a character not quite the soft and lovable Nissa that we know and love. Very different. The love and concern the Doctor and Tegan have for Nissa is actually pretty damn heartwarming and touching. Tegan too faces a similar situation as Nissa of being attacked in a dark room, just stalking her and standing right by her bed ready to attack. Jiminy Christmas, that is terrifying. Just to see someone just staring at you while you're asleep over your bed, and then just as you wake up they attack you. Guy's a freak. The depictions of Jeremy stalking the room late at night with the depictions of old wood creaking was excellent and creepy. What I like compared to Nissa is Tegan manages to shake off Jeremy's attempt of the vampire's power by beating people mentally by attacking the mind. Tegan is resistant and prevents this from happening, which I believe works well with Tegan's character because she is more stubborn, assertive and disagreeable compared to Nissa, which those are the characteristics of somebody who you are less likely to control or to be controlled by someone. And second point, Tegan has dealt with much powerful entities than the vampires, like the Mara, who Tegan seems to have built this wall of resistance due to the Mara, and can fight off mental attacks such as from vampires. Love the respect and the continuity of the book plays to previous stories, even though Nissa is depicted to have a very big role within the book. It doesn't forget about Tegan and the role that she has faced through the TV series. The moment Nissa transitions to a vampire is amazing, initially showing very sadistic intentions and brilliant writing by Paul Cornell. But people who adore Nissa might struggle to really picture these scenes with such a soft and lovable character into something which Nissa is quite the opposite of now. That's why this book has a strong selling point, not just following Blood Harvest, but the idea that Nissa is now looking for victims is enough to add a lot of weight to the story. Nissa uses a tactic to trick Tegan and the Doctor of associating with the people of Traken to be highly sensitive people and to have the sense to detect evil within the atmosphere. That's her excuse to try and trick the both of them to explain her weird behaviour, which seems to work initially. This scene right here, when Nissa is in her nightgown, but the W.H. Smith cover version, which they blocked and didn't use, describes the scene better than this. That scene, wow. Yeah. That scene is utterly terrifying. The scenes depicted of Nissa in that situation, and the thoughts and her urges growing to feed and find victims, and just covered in blood within the TARDIS, losing control and witnessing herself and the state that she's in. Boy, do you feel sympathetic for her. It's almost like the Planet of Giants situation, but I don't think she is doing that as Barbara did it, where she didn't want to be almost like a nuisance. Like, that's why Barbara was covering her sickness of DN6. Nissa's doing it because the vampiric effects are just too strong. Even though you know that the character's going to be fine, still, it's pretty damn dark. Also, a lot of questions come up about the vampires as, are they evil? The Doctor describes the vampires as just an unfortunate parasite that's inflicted onto people if they accept it or not. So not everyone who succumbed vampirism isn't inherently evil, but there are messiahs and lords, and the great ones, for example, who have malicious intentions. But where are all these Time Lord cults coming from who worship the vampires, and why it's so ingrained within this society that the vampires are to have free will and stuff? This goes really deep in the continuity and the history of the Time Lords and the vampires. It goes super deep, so yeah, I'm not going to cover it here because it will spoil it, and I think that's something for you to find out, the reader or the listener. So the book is not only rich and full of questions, all with a straightforward and easily digestible plot, but the feeling of desperation seriously kicks in, especially as the book progresses, becomes more and more apparent. The Fifth Doctor contemplating the events of Earthshock, and perhaps seeing the repeat of seeing Nissa slowly corrupted, or Tegan getting killed, is too much for him. And this character development plays a lot of respect to the Fifth Doctor era, that features before this book chronologically, but also foreshadowing to stories like Caves of Androzani, who will risk his own life for the safety of a stranger because of the battle of loss that has consumed him. And that is what Paul Cornell does so damn well. The things I've just listed with a simple, straightforward, digestible plot, really interesting questions that the book lays out, very deep lore between the Time Lords and the vampires, but the respect on the Fifth Doctor era, which I know it's not an era I particularly talk about a lot, but I 100% respect how faithful Paul Cornell is to the TV series. I have not seen it done this well and on the level of respect in any other Doctor Who book ever. So far, in my opinion, the respect deserves credit, that does. Yarvin, the main villain, following the events of Blood Harvest, is one interesting vampire. Very clever at manipulating people by using their own character flaws against them in a very subtle manner that isn't very easy to spot. Asks Nissa a lot of questions about vampirism, and saying lines like, if you're not faithful to vampirism, you are free to leave, and has no intentions or interest in leading anybody who isn't and doesn't not want to be a vampire. Also uses the history of the vampires about getting free will to his benefit as well. Poor Nissa and her gullible side of thinking everything is like Traken and powerful people keep to their word doesn't reflect to every society, and Yarvin is just a sly manipulator to deceive people. Ruoff gets pretty sadistic by understanding Yarvin's true deceitful nature and says, I love torturing the young and the innocent. Boy, Ruoff, you need to get a new hobby there. Let me go outside and go into the sun. Yeah, you do that. Chapter 6 takes on a rather different course to the rest of the book and focuses on building Gallifrey in connection to the vampires. Got some returning characters, which I will not spoil. It's not even listed on the Big Finish website, so I'm not sure how they will play Chapter 6 out. And understand more about Ruoff's character and her journey away from the traditional beliefs of the Time Lord Society and following the path of the Time Lord outcasts and the splinter factions and vampire cults who set their own fates, and is fascinated about vampirism and how their history is dark, cruel, and disturbing because of the actions of the Time Lords. So this book, as I said, not driven by its action. Its scenes, the questions it lays out, and the fantastic and very interesting characters that Paul Cornell has written and characterized. This book just shows just a really strong level of creative writing here, because it lays out these 4 very important points. Number 1, the plot is straightforward and simple yet captivating. Many scenes have shock value, which adds to the fear of the situation for the characters and adding desperation. Number 3, all the characters at some point are in terrible danger. Nissa from Yarvin's deceitfulness, Tegan's stubbornness to go and get Nissa, and the Doctor attacked in his own TARDIS where it's supposed to be a safe zone. And number 4, incredible written supporting characters and villains with really good motivations and intentions. What else did this book do for me? It made me appreciate the Fifth Doctor and his seriously growing on me. Before I said he was boring, one-dimensional, but my opinion is changing. His selfless acts and kind-hearted nature is wholesome, but still is unwise to be backed into a corner, and isn't the one to initiate violence at all, but will show sides and a little bit of darkness, which I feel the TV show lacked in delivering. But with the extended media, the books and Big Finish, the Fifth Doctor has grown on me within the ranking. Yeah, Goth Opera did that to me. Made me appreciate the Fifth Doctor even more because, God, there are so many just brilliant Fifth Doctor stories in the extended media and Big Finish, the Elite, and now Goth Opera is entering the reigns too. So, yeah, the Fifth Doctor, I'm very happy to say it's a positive direction, but I'm seriously appreciating the Fifth Doctor as an incarnation. Didn't expect that, eh? The final chapters with the showdown of the Doctor and Tegan, saving Nissa and battling Yarvin and Ruoff, took its time to happen, but I was ultimately satisfied. I haven't really said a negative thing, haven't I? Is this book perfect? No, it's not perfect. But the negatives, they're not as bad that they completely outshine the positives. I can deal with the negatives, really. But these are the negatives with Goth Opera. Victor Land's character, I just didn't care for. What the character was going through, his intentions and plans. Ironic that the Fifth Doctor didn't care for him either. He was lackluster. About it, really. Lackluster character. Second negative is how the book and how Cornell dealt with Ruoff's character. I think Yarvin's was a good send-off. Makes sense, but Ruoff's? I'm not sure. First off, it was 100% rushed how Ruoff's character was concluded. 100%. And without spoiling it, Ruoff's conclusion to her character is just almost a copycat of another classic Doctor Who episode of a villain. Almost happens in the exact same way. It's identical. And I can't say it because it will just spoil the audio, so I can't, but it is a rip-off of another classic television story. The sequence is the same. That was rather sloppy, and maybe it was in some way paying homage to a Doctor Who story from the 60s. That's a little hint, but I don't know, I just found it kind of sloppy. I wish they dealt with Ruoff's character a little bit better. Well, the ending of her character. The ending to the character was goofy as hell, but overall, I was very satisfied with Goth Opera. So in conclusion, this is a big win. The Big Finish are adapting Goth Opera, and I have faith that it will deliver well. Because if it sells well, we are getting more. I highly recommend that you pick up Goth Opera, either the book, to prepare yourself for the audio, or just get the audio. Obviously, there will be differences, and it will not be a 100% adaptation, because stuff like Nightshade or Romance of Crime, English Way of Death, Damaged Goods, Well-Mannered War, there have been differences, or things that are just not used. The straightforward plot, very easy to read, flies by, lays a lot of questions, really good lore, can be quite deep lore, and goes into a big rabbit hole, but I still appreciated it. And the fantastic characters besides Victor Land. This gets a 9 out of 10 for me. Now, I give it the same rating as Revelation, and I don't really know which one I prefer, because Revelation is weird and wonderful, but Goth Opera is so much more straightforward and has shocking scenes. Revelation is more creative. This is more straightforward. Both kind of have their shock value, but this has it more, and it's well paced. It's better paced. So, I'm trying to think which one I prefer. But I think my enjoyment, I enjoyed the whole thing really, besides two little silly scenes at the end of Ruoff's character and Victor Land's a bit lackluster. I would say I slightly, ever so slightly prefer Goth Opera to Revelation. I think this has a much higher rereadability. So it gets a 9 out of 10. So that was Goth Opera, written by Paul Cornell. Highly recommended, fantastic book. Now the next missing adventure to be reviewed is Evolution. Though that's not going to happen right now, because I will be going back to the Virgin New Adventures. I'll be reviewing the Cat's Cradle trilogy. Starting with, Time's Crucible. People say that the book melts people's brains, but they cannot comprehend its complicated nature. We will have fun there, won't we? Let's see. I hear shaky things, so we'll see how that goes. Thanks for watching my review of Goth Opera. Highly recommended. Smashing book. I was really impressed with that. So thanks for watching, and of course, have a good one.